Our third speaker is Jacky Comforty. Jacky Comforty is an award-winning, and he says, I'm quoting him, multidisciplinary, multicultural, and multilingual filmmaker, oral historian, author, and media creating. He specializes in documentation of education and socialization. He created his film independently. He's an independent researcher in the United States, Germany, Israel, and Bulgaria. I will not read to you the list of the awards he won. It's really a very impressive one. And he has, as we said, an intriguing topic, the stolen narrative of the Bulgarian Jews and the Holocaust. And when we spoke before, he told me that while doing or creating one film, The Optimist that we have seen, it's an excellent one indeed, he accumulated so much material that now he has to go on. Please.
שלום. אני אדבר באנגלית, ואני מבקש סליחה שאני מדבר באנגלית, אבל פשוט את הספר שלי כתבתי באנגלית, ואני מרגיש נוח יותר לדבר על הנושא הזה באנגלית, אם לא אכפת לכם. The Stolen Narrative of the Bulgarian Jews is actually the name of a book that came out that I wrote together with Martha Alagian Bloomfield, who is somewhere in the back and raising her hand and waving. And it's a result of over 30 years of research and collection of material. I don't know how to switch pages. Do I have to do it myself or, well, me too. Oh, okay, I'm cooking. So first of all, I'd like to explain who I am and where I come from. I am not an historian, I'm a documentarian, and I have been doing oral histories with Bulgarian Jews and Bulgarians, Gentiles, and eyewitnesses, and also experts over the last 33 years. I've done, in order to understand the Bulgarian story, I needed to learn a lot about the Holocaust in other places to be able to place it in the same context. And part of this project was basically over the years I recorded some 250 oral histories with different survivors of different experiences, and had to develop methodology for doing those oral histories in a way that I will not influence the oral history, and the questions will basically, or the situation will allow the people to become storytellers rather than me imposing a certain narrative on them. I collected not only oral histories, but I also have collected archival footage. During 1990, I was for 3 months in Israel. Dr. Moshe Mosek, a friend and a former head of the Israeli State Archives, got me all the doors open in Bulgaria, and for a rare moment, everyone wanted to help. So I got access to all the film footage that was filmed in Bulgaria from the beginning of motion pictures of up to the 1950s, and I copied photographs and documents from 20 different libraries, archives, resources. I felt like I am in Treasure Island and don't have enough pockets to stuff with things that I was finding. It was a very weird sensation. When I started 35 years ago, I wanted to find out how our peoples were saved. My interest in the subject came through my parents, who told me you really need to tell the story of how we were saved, and this was how I approached the story from the beginning. But as I was researching more and finding more, I was realizing the story is a lot more complex and is not just a happy story. And then there was always the need to be able to tell things in a differentiated way rather than colorizing them too pink or too dark. Now, because I am a collector and I visited in many locations where things happened, I somehow developed a certain forensic approach to these all. My thoughts were, if there is a denial of proven facts, what is it that is not proven and what are the hidden elements that we don't know about that people don't deny? So I became always a little more suspicious about how I approach the story. So for about 80 years, the story of the Holocaust in Bulgaria was hijacked and used for political purposes. We know that, forget these things. We know that deception, disinformation, and propaganda is part of the final solution. And in Bulgaria, we could have seen examples of that already in the 30s. You can hear people in oral histories telling us already in the late 30s, don't worry, nothing will happen to you, the king will save you. And the same kind of speech is repeated too many times to be just occasional. It sounds like it's some kind of a attempt to control the mood in Bulgaria. It's very important for me, it was always important for me not to glorify perpetrators who did not succeed to complete their plot to deport the Jews, and not to crown rescuers for what they were not, especially when I was able to compare people who were courageous enough to risk their lives to rescue somebody or to save somebody or to spare their lives. And by the Bulgarian politics trying to take over the story, basically what was lost was the lesson of individuals, real noble people who were able to mobilize and help their friend or a neighbor or a community. And I think that just by politics, the politics made the story a little bit diluted and added a lot of mythology and invented type of heroism. Most of the glorifying myths take advantage of the good and the naivete of people. Stories of kindness we all are happy to hear, and in the 90s we could hear a lot about the Bulgarian Schindler. There were all these attempts to give medals to Boris in Los Angeles in 1994, and everyone was so excited. It was the time of the Schindler List, and we all were very happy to find more positive stories, but this was a fabricated one. Basically, I would say that Bulgaria did not only invade and annex those territories of Greece and Yugoslavia, but also invaded and annexed our common memory. I remember many people telling, we will tell you how we saved you, and there was never a real recognition of what happened. And nobody mentioned, but President Parvanov came here in 2008 to Yad Vashem and asked for forgiveness for Bulgaria's role in the deportation of the Jews of Greece, of the occupied and annexed territories of unified Bulgaria. But a few years later came the declaration that we saw earlier today in Zdravska's presentation, where there was basically a denial of any responsibility. Pretty soon after the war ended in Bulgaria, there was a major concern that Bulgaria is going to lose to Greece some territory in the south, and they were really worried about losing Pirin to Greece and paying as an extra kind of punishment. And so Zaharia Alkalai, who was the Bnei head in Plovdiv, was addressed by Kimon Georgiev, the Bulgarian prime minister, and he asked him to intervene with Jews, Bnei Brit, in the US in behalf of Bulgaria, as Bulgaria was worried that it will have to pay a heavy price for its role during the war. This is where I believe some of the phrases stems from that later have echoed in the Eichmann trial. So Zecharia Alkalai wrote a letter to Henry Monsky, who was involved with from the Jewish side of the Jewish community in deliberation regarding the founding of the UN, and also in advance of the peace treaty in Paris. There was this pressure, and I believe that these phrases came from this time, that there was no Holocaust in Bulgaria, that the deportees were not Bulgarians, that there were more Jews in Bulgaria after the war than before, that not even one Bulgarian Jew died on Bulgarian soil, and all the other myths that we saw here today earlier, that the labor camps were made to protect them, that the deported to the ghetto were sent also for protection, and also the myth about the Jews being more Jews after the war than before the war. And here I'd like to point out a document that is in Rumen Avramov's amazing volume. There is on page, I think, 768, there's a document in which Belev counts the number of the Jews of the country, and it says in 1939 we had 52,000 Jews, then we expelled 4,000 in 1939, then we added 13,000 from those territories, and now we have about 61,500 Jews, and we are planning to deport them in 3 different ways. First, the Jews who are in the Kraini Pokraini, in Zapadny Pokraini, in these annexed territories of former Thrace and Macedonia. The other second deportation was supposed to be the Jews of the big cities, and the third deportation was supposed to be of the Jews in the small cities. So at no time the Jews of these annexed territories were seen as different Jews, except after the war, when there was an attempt to deny that they had anything to do with Bulgaria. All these myths have also somehow have come to the surface during the Eichmann trial, and Hannah Arendt was writing about that. And so the myths were somehow perpetuated, and this is what we knew about it. In Bulgaria, pretty soon, I think I would say in October 1944, there already started the local debate of who saved the Jews, and there were attempts to try and get credit for the Communist Party. And because the story is so big, and because the rescue is so big, of course, it's not meant for a small regular hero. It needs to be either a king or the head of the Communist Party. It cannot just be anything else but an extreme kind of a person. And as Fred Cherry said, the subject of who saved the Jews became a political football. The question of who saved the Jews is a very highly manipulated question. And that was the question that was always present as the question. What's the question about Bulgaria and the Holocaust? Who saved the Jews? This very naive question is hiding multiple deceptions behind it. First of all, that it was a saving and not an escape or hiding or resistance or anything else. That all the Jews were saved. Somehow, saving the Jews puts a blanket over all the Jews and makes us forget the Jews from those annexed territories that were deported. It also, in this little question, is who. It means there's one person who could be in charge. And so the assumption is there's one rescuer here. And then that it was a single action of rescue. It happened once, and that's it. All these assumptions that are kind of hiding or manipulations that are hidden behind these questions are not true. They're not true because it was not all the Jews, because was not an action of one person, because it wasn't a one-time kind of an action of a rescue. And somehow this whole story has evolved this way that, by being and then adding to the story that the king is basically the victim of Hitler because he didn't want to give over the Jews. This somehow created a situation where the victim is the king and not the people that he deported. So by making the king the victim, we are hiding those who were his victims. And then we are just also don't give him any responsibility for the policies of his own government. The phrases of Bulgarian Jews, non-Bulgarian Jews, these are all kinds of attempts to minimize the crime. It doesn't matter if you kill Bulgarian Jews or Greek Jews or whoever. It doesn't have to be Jews. Whoever you killed is a killed person. So trying to find somehow ways to whitewash what happened is an ongoing thing. I don't know how much time I do have.
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly. You have 6 minutes.
6 minutes, so I'm going to fly through. I will not count who did what. I will just say that ultimately, since the 90s came a very strong interest of the Bulgarian king who was in exile to go back to Bulgaria as a king, or he ended up as a prime minister. And that affected this huge campaign of trying to make his father, the king, a rescuer. There was this fancy event in Los Angeles where there was a medal and 750 people have attended the monument that was tried to be erected in Jerusalem. All these things were attempts to build up the king as a rescuer and benefit politically and economically from it. When the king became prime minister, things got even more kind of dicey. And there was this, in the Organization of Security in Europe, at the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, 2003 and 2004, the Jewish foreign minister of Bulgaria, Solomon Passy, gave the Jewish star to Joschka Fischer, the Jewish foreign minister of Germany. Here, take it back, it's yours. And this Bakalit thing, there's nothing more typical Bulgarian and Holocaust than this one. Forgive me for moving back and forth. I'm a dancer. That is about Passy. Then we had Parvanov, who came to Yad Vashem and asked for excusing. And then a few years later, there was a retreat of this declaration. But I want to say about how things have escalated in the last 10 years. In the last 10 years, we started hearing expressions about there are Jews that are grateful and there are Jews that are ungrateful Jews. And those ungrateful Jews are anti-Bulgarianists. It's a new terminology. I heard it from very extreme right-wing Bulgarians who lived in Berlin and in Holland. I heard that in different forms of expression, and I must say this form of expression is slowly becoming mainstream, and you just hear it also from more official faces, and that's quite a concern that this type of a toxic terminology has infiltrated. So what I want to say is that the main concern for me is the intimidation, the brutality of the denial and the aggression of this denial, the attempts to take over the terminology of the victim, and then ultimately it is an anti-Semitic it has anti-Semitic nuances, the condemnations of those who are critical. And I want to just quote the last thing from Professor Alvin Rosenfeld, who's the head of the Center for the Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism in Indiana University. And one of the most highly charged development of our time is the upsurge of anti-Semitism on a global scale. Such hostility has increased significantly since the end of the previous century, and while it takes a variety of forms and poses different challenges in different parts of the world, it is always a threat and needs to be taken seriously, and not only by Jews. It needs to be carefully studied and wherever possible effectively contested and combated. So, I don't believe we should condemn research or we should condemn the researchers. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing with us your thoughts, and thank you for the efforts that you have put in organizing this impressive conference. We do have some 5 minutes for questions to our 3 speakers. I already see a hand there, please. רגע, ויש מיקרופון נייד? Yeah. כן, גם אנחנו אחרת לא נשמע. Oh. Now we see you in full.
Thank you. A question to Professor Nagari from Paris. You said that the deportation from Sofia, from the camps around Sofia, were carried on May and on June 43. Is there any geographical or sociological difference between the deportation of May and the deportation of June?
As a matter of fact, the deportation was announced on May 21. It was decided, and people got to learn that they would have to leave within a matter of 3 days. I gave you data which were collected in a report that covered a period between May 24 and June 7. So that was the same, that was part and parcel. I mean, you had 19,000 people who were leaving, so that's the same time it took in terms of train for them who left. Those who remained, it's also very important to emphasize that point. A few of them are listed as present, but as a matter of fact, they were gone as forced laborers, because Belaf had planned already, as he wanted to make sure that there would be no form of protest. He needed to actually call early men in 1943 to make sure that there would be few men left at the time of deportation. And that was a vision he already had in February. So by the time there was the expulsion from Sofia, a large number of the men were no longer there. You had mostly women, children, and elderly. And those who managed to remain, who were a very small number of people, at times was through connections, so because their professions were very important, and at times they were a bit later deported. So there is no sociological, gender, generational difference between end of May, early June. But there are differences between those who managed to stay a bit longer, a few weeks or a few months, and those who had to depart. One final element, oftentimes, as you may know, Jews were split, meaning you would not have an entire family being sent to a city. You would have one person in Pleven, another one in Samokov, a third one in Goran Jumaya, and people had to come and plead and use all their connections and pay lawyers to make sure that they could join members of their family or be sent to a place where they would know relative, when they were not permitted to work nor to withdraw money. So you had, in addition, this splitting up, this breaking up of families who believed they were going to die separated.
Yeah. Thank you for this detailed answer. Thank you. Who else? Please.
I just want to add that some of those who remained in the city were veterans who were carrying around yellow star. They had some privileges, veterans of World War I, and probably most of the 2,000 that have remained in the city were people who were veterans, and that's why they had the privileges to stay.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? No? The speakers convinced you? And now you're, please. There is one person remain not convinced, please.
Hello. So I'm from the United States, and one of the things that we're really focusing on over there is democratic backsliding and how we can actually focus on some of these kinds of narratives to fight that and create a better world. So could you guys just touch a little bit on how this stolen narrative touches on modern times and what the world's going through right now?
This is a question. Yeah.
Another conference.
Yeah, this is a question for another conference. This is a question that we call from Avraham Avinu on. I'm afraid that this is not the time to answer it in full, unless we can. You would like to add one sentence?
Say one thing. I think education is important. I also live in the States, and many times I see people don't know what anti-Semitism is if they are not Jewish, and they may say things that are inappropriate or offensive. And you find that the problem is ignorance, really, and the need is for education. We were part of a conference about the way how hate crimes are being prosecuted, and anti-Semitism is being prosecuted in Bulgaria, in Germany, in Romania, half a year ago, and Nadeja was also part of this conference. And the problem is that prosecutors don't know what anti-Semitism is, so they don't know how to prosecute, and they cannot differentiate. I can only say that the Attorney General in the state that I live, 3 months ago, when Kanye West made some horrific statements, he said that it's his right to express his opinion, and it's quite natural considering the Jewish influence in Hollywood. And this is the Attorney General of the state, the guy who's in charge of putting people on trial for hate crimes. So he's so ignorant and so intolerant, so that you don't know what to do, but you really need education.
Yeah.
Sentence, if I may.
Maybe I'll add some. Okay.
Please.
Yes, just one very short sentence, because I'm also teaching a lot and doing transmission of knowledge. I've been wondering why students are fascinated by two kinds of narratives. On the one hand, things with rescue. They're looking for a new hero. They're looking for a hope. They're looking for a way of thinking that the world can be positive. So they are seeking rescuers. And the moment you say, well, it's more complicated, you will have to nuance your view, they're extremely frustrated. And they're also fascinated by extreme cruelty and perpetrators. And that's an evolution in society, in part complex, in part linked to video games, multiple lives. You kill, you torture, you're born again. You kill, you torture, you're born again. And their inability to understand the factuality of human suffering is also something extremely difficult. So those two extremes, seeking the beauty of it works, the rescue, and at the same time being unaware of the lived experience of suffering and death, because you can be reborn 10 times in the video games, are what constitutes their personalities. And if we want to teach, we need to find a path in between two extreme ways of understanding self and the world.
Yeah. Well, as we said, I want
to add.
You are getting an answer.
I want to add thing. I'm a little bit more reluctant regarding education. On a personal level, we can see that there is an upsurge in anti-Semitism in spite of all what we are doing and in spite of the past. But there's another important lesson, and that is being alert to behaviors of governments, right? And reacting on time, being active, and because the sliding of governments because of power politics and competences and so on, that is something that can happen in a very short time. And that is something that, for instance, happened in Nazi Germany, right? But also in other cases. And the alertness of the public, that is something that it can succeed more if you are aware of it and if people are educated to pay attention and not to say politics is not for me.
Yeah. I think you did get an answer after all, and you did mean, and your question is a good one, or the answers to your question is a good one to end our session with, because you mentioned democracy when you started speaking, and certainly, if I may add and close by that, you were speaking about lessons, about studying the past for a better world. There is no doubt that academia that does real down-to-earth, basic, fair research flourishes only in democracy. No doubt. Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you in Paris. Bye-bye. Say hello to Paris.